Greetings. We'll be touring this amazing Jean Roth Driscoll design perched on a South Pasadena hilltop. It's just beautiful. And before we start the tour, I'd like to introduce our panelists for the discussion. Homeowner Gary Bro sits on the board of the Theodore Payne Foundation for Wildflowers and Native Plants. Say hello, Gary.
Hello, great to be with you today.
Thank you for being here. And Eric, a landscape architect and designer with FormLA Landscaping, one of our very own, designed this garden as well as many fire defensive tour gardens across LA from Malibu to Arcadia. Say hi, Eric.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for being here, Eric. And I'm Cassie Aoyagi, one of the principals of FormLA Landscaping. And Gary, would you like to introduce everybody to the home and the architect?
Yes, this house was designed by Jean Roth Driscoll for her family in 1953. She was, at that time, there weren't very many women architects, so she was a bit of a pioneer in her field. And she built this house for her family. And I think all the owners since then have tried to carry on protecting the architecture and the design of this house, and as have we with not only our house, but the landscaping around the house.
What an amazing woman, and firsts of many in her field. So what a great person to have designed your home. So defensive landscaping is definitely about location, and where we locate our homes certainly matters. We know that some areas are well-worn paths of fire, and hilltops are no exception. Like this one, it makes this home very exposed and vulnerable. Embers are the primary source of ignition of homes. In designing defensive gardens, we want to think like they think. So we have a really windy, narrow road. Gary, I was wondering if you thought about some of the challenges for the fire agencies in coming up here.
Oh, yes, very much so. I mean, as you can see, the road is very narrow. It actually dead ends at the top of the hill, and there's not a very big turnaround. So the fire department comes through very regularly. You can see from these pictures, there's only parking on one side of the street to provide enough room for fire trucks to get through. And the homeowners have to be very diligent in keeping the vegetation away from the road so trucks can pass through easily. So certainly is a concern being at the top of a hill and having it be so windy and narrow.
So yeah, I mean, location is everything. And now we can move from location into the actual defensive strategies. And Eric, I noticed just a moment ago, the oak trees, both Gary's oak trees and the neighbors. Can you talk a little bit about what those lend or don't?
Sure. Yeah, having the existing oak trees is very valuable. Being that the oak trees are evergreen and stay hydrated, they actually act as a great first defense for embers from reaching the home.
Yeah, and it seems like this whole neighborhood is filled with both native and non-native trees, which lend to that. As we're looking at the architecture, maybe both of you, I noticed that there's kind of a wood fence leading up to the home, and then I see all these wooden posts. Can you guys maybe talk a little bit about some of the architecture and landscape features?
Yeah, Gary, I can start off if you don't mind. Like there, you can see the fence. Although we want to always be conscious of materials, that in the design, we wanted to make sure that we kept flammable materials such as a wood fence that may match the architecture. We want to keep it open for access, and of course, keep the landscape in front of it well hydrated.
Yeah, just to follow on to that, I think in redoing the landscaping, we tried to be very mindful to have plants around the house that are very drought tolerant and not flammable. So you'll see, especially around the entrance, a lot of succulents, as well as native plants. And I think that all goes a long way to protecting the house if there was a fire.
Yeah, and even, you know, there are challenges even with a historical home where some of the main features, like those beautiful, just, you know, very architectural wooden beams that hold up the house, those may have been a different material at a different time in this day and age of fire.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, Eric, tell me a little bit about the coyote bush that we saw at the front of the house.
Yeah, and being, of course, that it's a hillside property, it was important that, you know, we use plant material like the coyote brush that stays very well hydrated and low, so that it actually, if you look at it from an ember catching strategy, as embers come up from the street, it actually creates a nice low barrier before it hits the house, the fence and the house, which is the most flammable thing on the property.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things about many of these deep-rooted native plants is that even if a fire were to come and burn through, those plants rejuvenate and their roots will live below while and eventually stump sprout and spawn new plants later, which is one of the benefits we have with the natives. So we're going to move to the back and we're going to think about how embers move. We're always strategizing against the embers, and they fly on the wind and they bounce and roll toward areas where they can collect and build heat. So let's start to think like an ember. Gary, while your windows just offer amazing daylighting, when you look at the back of the house, are there things that concern you?
Well, yes, I mean, obviously the house is all wooden pretty much, except for the windows, and which could be very flammable. So we've tried to keep things, you know, well painted, well sealed. We don't really have much attic. We have a little bit of an attic with some vents, so we keep those well screened off as well. And while the patio around the house was, you know, obviously for entertaining and our comfort, it's nice to see also what a good fire break that makes around the house.
Yeah, so Eric, how about the landscape? What are the inhibitors that you've set up there?
Yeah, and like Gary said, I think when we looked at the design, of course, the first goal is to provide outdoor space and living room, but is to create that 5 to 10 feet buffer or more, as you can see. And then that's backed up by, of course, using native plants that are local to the region and stay hydrated so that they would resist embers.
Awesome. Thank you. And I don't know if you noticed the even the pots up against the house are little mini ember blockers that can help keep embers from gathering against the base of the house and collecting as well. Okay, I didn't want to play the same video over, so we'll move on to the next. And this picture really highlights this 5 to 10 feet of defensible space around the house. And it's a safe place if you're a firefighter to be able to turn your back on this home and put embers out in the landscape. So now we're going to focus on the tree canopy. And what we see from the neighbor's house here is a eucalyptus tree. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Well, the eucalyptus trees are notorious for dropping a lot of leaves, bark, depending on the time of year. And so probably one of our biggest maintenance things is cleaning up after that on a regular basis, both in the landscape as well as on the patios.
And you can see even this neighbor's looks like a Class A roof has leaf litter. And then you contrast that with these much denser green native oaks that can act as ember blockers, as Eric was talking about before, to the very open eucalyptus. You can see the contrast there and how they would function so differently. And here you have sandwiched by two roofs. You've got a tile roof here. Does that collect with leaf litter, Gary?
Yes, that has quite a bit. I'd say once a year at least, they get that cleaned off, and our neighbors do a good job of keeping the trees trimmed at least annually, which I think helps some as well.
What about in the garden with the leaf litter?
Oh, the garden, well, the bioswale particularly, which I think maybe you haven't seen yet, collects quite a bit, so that needs to be cleaned regularly. And not a lot falls on our roof, so that's helpful. We do keep that swept off a few times a year, but I don't see a lot of gathering on the roof.
And Eric, I saw a lot of mulch in the garden. How does that function with the leaf litter? Everyone always asks me about this.
Yeah, and we do use drip irrigation, so we keep the ground moist, but through that, the mulch actually helps collect the leaf litter and help it actually to decompose rather than just sitting on the top.
So it wicks it right up.
Right.
Okay. More beautiful reels ahead. Now this was an existing fence, right, Gary?
Yes, yeah, that was our neighbor's fence that we left up as it was.
So we can talk about that as we go through this video, but Eric, can you talk a little bit about the strategy behind the dry creek bed? It's absolutely gorgeous, by the way.
Sure, yeah, the dry creek bed, it was designed to actually bring a real nice feature into the garden, but also acts as a collector to help manage the water and put it back into the local ground table right there in the garden.
Yeah, and all of that percolation of water keeps the soil hydrated and cooler. And as our fire season extends to more months out of the year, we need all of that moisture on site as long as we can get it. How about the bridges? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, in the fabrication design, we were looking at using thicker timbers that have a slower burn rate, but also just for accessibility to the back of the yard.
They're utterly charming, and it looks like you're doing some vegetable gardening, Gary.
Yep. We've had pretty good luck with our vegetables, except the native plants have gotten so tall and big now, they cast a lot of shade. So we have to be very selective what we can grow, but we would prefer to have the large native plants than a vegetable garden flourish.
Yeah,
so
and speaking of the large native plants, as you've been rolling through this video, I've seen Catalina cherry hedges. Here's a California lilac bush. I've seen coffee berry. Tell me more about this, Eric.
Yeah, and by using taller native shrubs that are local to the region, like I said, they create the height and to kind of create a green barrier to the fence and to the home for embers. That's our first focus.
More ember blockers, really.
Right, correct.
Yeah. And I see the Catalina cherries out on my hikes. They're one of the greenest plants out there in the middle of the high heat of the summer in the wildland spaces too. So it seems like while have a lot of deliberate strategies here, we're getting quite a bit more because I'm looking at the textures, the colors, the pollinators. Gary, is that the year-round experience?
Oh yeah, very much so. And it's one of the big surprises when we had our garden redone is how much of the native, bees, insects, birds are attracted to our yard now. And it's pretty much year round. And, as things go through their flowering stage, the bees are obviously busy. We then let it go to seed, the birds come. And the Catalina cherries, the cherries on there are a great source of food. So you really feel like you're doing a lot, not only for fire protection, but for the local habitat and the local animals.
So we can have our cake and eat it too, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Very nice. So Eric, do you want to talk about this agave?
Yeah, so, although originally to the home, there was a lot of succulents, so we wanted to maintain that. But, just succulents are very nice, although they don't have the deep root system that we'd want with native plants. There's a good balance that we can watch and when we do the design.
Yeah, and what I've noticed in steep hillside areas is that have burned where there are plants like agaves is once the rains come after a burn, those those plants don't stay in the soil, and that's where we really undermine stability and have the cycle of floods and slides. So
Yeah,
it can be really scary.
one of the bad after effects of a fire, right?
Absolutely. Um, I have just noticed a lot of flowers, Eric. Um, Tell me about, I mean, are we chewing trade-offs here?
I think it, like Gary said, creating a garden using natives, you don't sacrifice any of the flowers or the color or the textures. And to have that with a peace of mind with having a more defensive landscape is really beneficial. And I hope, Gary, you can add in, but I'm happy to hear you say that you guys are enjoying the outdoor space.
Oh yeah, very, very much so. And I do a fair amount of the maintenance on the garden myself, and you do kind of get to know your plants. And these native plants, they're very resilient. They don't require a lot of maintenance, but some attention throughout the year. And one of the great qualities is many of them are evergreen, so throughout the year they look great.
And that was deliberate. The evergreen foliage is one of the key strategies to a defensive landscape in a wildland urban interface garden, for sure. Eric, before we move on, I noticed there were some grasses in one of the very first clips in the front of the house, and I saw some grasses throughout the backyard clip. Can you tell me about, is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we like the fine textures of the grasses. Doesn't mean you don't have to use those, but stay away from higher fire fuel grasses such as feather grass, pampas grass, and grasses that are like have that tend to spread and not be from the region. So we want to stay with native grasses.
Because in nature, they actually aren't adapted to our summer heat in the wildland spaces, so they dry out, right?
Right, correct. And so where a native plant would be used to that and hold the moisture more and longer. So we'd want to kind of refrain from using non-native grasses.
So it's all about the hydration.
Right.
And the native foliage too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, defensive landscaping practices clearly provide so many benefits. They support our health and they save us both time and money. So I just would like to thank you both for your time, Gary, the wonderful work you do at the Theodore Payne Foundation, and Eric, we value you so much and all of your expertise at FormLA Landscaping. And I also would like to thank USGBCLA for creating this platform so we can continue to share how we can be beautiful and defensive at the same time. I just want to thank you guys.